Okay, going live. Southern California, where it is rainy and all kinds of awful traffic accidents. Okay, how many accidents do you guys see coming on the way today? Anybody that drove in? One? Just one. Okay, they're all over. Okay. All right, so last we left off, we were looking at climate and ecosystems. I did talk about climate change. I didn't do enough justice to that topic, so I will be touching on that topic for another section in our class further on in the semester. So we'll go into ecological anthropology, which is the study of ecosystems and humans being included in ecosystems. Then we'll also have a week where we'll talk about environmental anthropology, which is more about management, policy, knowledge, and that kind of stuff, okay? So we will not only leave that topic where it lay on Tuesday, okay? So going into the different anthropological fields, taking off from your text that I posted for you on the university system, we've got cultural anthropology, which is this class, right? Where we're primarily focusing on areas including linguistics, cognitive anthropology, political anthropology, economic, maybe even medical as well, okay? And going into others, however, we have archaeology. Again, remember, I've highlighted certain topics because they'll be on the test, okay? So I've highlighted archaeology and paleontology here. So archaeology is primarily concerned with reconstructing human past. So what are our behaviors? We look into all kinds of sites that we've inhabited, places that you can have evidence of humans. We even look at primates, right, for the development of what we call our human line, okay, our human species. But it's primarily focused on human behavior, okay? When we're looking in comparison to paleontology, that's more about all species. So if you were interested in climate change, by example, and you wanted to look at all species and the meteorological differences over time, and the effects on all species, that would be something that you would study in paleontology, okay? Dinosaurs, that kind of stuff, right? So now you know a little bit of the difference, okay? So make sure that you can distinguish those two. Biological anthropology, we're looking at human fossils, right? Physical anthropology, even maybe the chest size of different groups. If you remember, we had some of our reading make reference to the chest size being larger among groups that are living at higher altitude, okay? So that would be something that you might study in biological anthropology, okay? Linguistic, this is about language, right? And about how language influences the way we think, the way we talk about certain things in our environment, maybe even just the environment itself as well, right? And how we pass on that kind of knowledge through language, right? In addition to the problem that not all things in language can translate from one language to another. Ever try to tell a joke from one language into another language and makes no sense whatsoever, right? Done that. I can tell you all kinds of funny jokes in Spanish, they make no sense in English. Silly jokes, right? Okay, so primatology, we're interested in primatology as it relates to humans, obviously because we think that we have some evolutionary connection in this line, right? I think we've learned about this quite a bit. I've got some links there to some of the more recent discussions about babonos. We believe that they might even be closer to us than chimps, okay? In the beginning, we thought, well, here's what distinguishes us from primates. We have culture, right? Ever hear that? Raise your hand if you've heard that, right? We have culture. They don't, right? Well, guess what? We discovered they have culture. They have culture. They use tools. They do all kinds of things very similar to us. In fact, we can even teach them how to sign language. Try that on for size and communicate with some chimpanzees that know how to sign, right? There's a place in Eastern Washington that's a home for chimpanzees that have been released from scientific experiments, And so it's kind of like a restoration place for them to go to and recover. And a lot of them have learned sign language and they communicate via sign. Fascinating. I'd love to work in a place like that, right? Primatology. Okay. I also put down 2 interesting links here which are my own and I adore. So they are from my Google's link or my Google Drive. This is called Hombre Grande. We talk about Hombre Grande a lot in Nicaragua, especially among the Mayagna. My favorite stories are those that are told at the dinner table by candlelight. You can see the fire in the kitchen burning. And we talk about Hombre Grande, and they say, we know people have seen Hombre Grande, or I've seen Hombre Grande, or I know where Hombre Grande is. And they talk about this being, have even drawn detailed sketches for me, right? The back leg is like a horse, right? It's got that weird kind of elbow, like our elbows like this is the back leg, right? Okay. It loves to eat something that they call land crabs. Pick it up for you so you can see what these things look like. See that? So we know what it eats. It's not just like there's this creature that's this mythical being and out there. Reportedly, it's somewhere between 15, 20, 25 feet tall. It can reach into your house, grab you, and take you running into the forest. Scary, right? So you want to know where it lives, right? So we have people that know where this being lives and stay away from the area, or at least be extra careful when you're there, right? I have this picture because this bone back here I have in my office in Nicaragua. We found it. We have evidence of it existing. We have evidence of discussion of it being encountered. Here's your drawing of what it looks like. Ah, something wrong with my. All right, hold on. Let's do this. There. Okay. If you look at the reading, it's a little confusing for us because we disagree. I'll try not to do this too much. Okay. Largest ground sloth could reach tree leaves more than 15 feet in the air. Here it's looking for its usual meal. It lived in many parts of North and South America from about 2 million years ago to about 10,000 years ago. Remember, that's when we're domesticating crops, right? And domesticating animals, all that kind of stuff. When the sloth fed, it stretched its lips and long tongue. Sloth. Oh my gosh, it looks like a human being. This makes sense. Hombre grande, right? Big man. Sloth fed, it stretched its lips and long tongue around the leaves and pulled them into its mouth, much the way a giraffe does. All right, well, they don't talk about the fact that it likes to eat crabs that are found in the forest as well. But here's your hombre grande. And I have this drawn in pencil by my Mayagna friends. Fascinating stuff. Okay? They say he still exists. All right. So a little bit on primatology as it relates to the Mayagna, right? Okay, and that being found in their territory. Okay, going on to talk about cultural anthropology, we talk about ethnographies. This is one of our specialties where we're writing detailed accounts about a culture group. It might be something specialized or focused on kinship, like family. It might be something focused on the environment. It might be like something focused on land rights, but in general, what we're talking about is something that's encompassing every aspect that we can talk about that culture, okay? We say this is holistic, right? Okay, there's some links there for you on primatology and whatnot, okay? All right. So in your text also it says a few things about culture. So let's talk about culture. It says culture is something learned. We said last time, you learn probably at a very young age and even more going along, right? When your brain gets bigger, you learn language. Obviously your learning picks up, right? Also said it was shared, right? Something that we share together. And then symbolic. But what in the world does that mean? Culture is symbolic. What the heck is that?
We have a lot of communal symbols we use, like the stop sign.
Right, we have symbols that we use, and they're really important, right? Anybody got any money? Get it out. Get it out. I would like a bill, and I would like a credit card. So like some paper money and credit card. Anybody got any? Oh, come on. You have at least something. Come on, come on, come on. All right, credit card. I got one. When it's stop sign. Oh, where's my bill? Yay! All right. 20. All right. I can go far with these. Woohoo! So, what are these? Plastic and paper. Plastic and paper. And when we don't have symbols in society, we recycle plastic and paper. That's what we do with plastic and paper. But the fact that we have symbols in society makes the fact that I just threw that plastic and paper into the trash very disturbing, doesn't it? How many people are having a hard time with this right now? 1, 2, 3. How many people want to run over to the trash and grab it and get it out, right? Should I leave it there, the whole class? No. Okay. All right, well, here you go.
Oh, it was the opposite way. Wait.
That's right. All right, so culture symbolic, right? Necessarily so, because otherwise we couldn't get along and communicate, right? Thank you for fixing it. Okay. Sometimes, however, we have a clash in our culture. We see this a lot. In fact, we're seeing a lot more than we ever did before. True? Culture clash happens all the time. Even among friends, right? Sometimes it's even heartbreaking the more it goes, right? I don't know. Social media, I think of so much, that occurs on social media when people just duke it out and it's just clash, right? All right, so in our reading, we have an example of one group. I grew up near the Olympic Peninsula, actually in Seattle, but it was close to the Olympic Peninsula, right? And on the Olympic Peninsula, we have an indigenous group called the Macaw. And they're very, very well known, famous, and worldwide famous now because of their pursuit of whaling, okay? How many people like whales? I like whales too. Aren't they cute? Well, they might not be cute, but we could call them charismatic, right? In fact, I know somebody that calls them charismatic megafauna, right? She studied them. She worked with the macaw and worked with them in their whale hunt activities and dealing with the outside world, okay? So what we know about the macaw is that back when the land was declared a state, and we know that the federal government took these lands, right, and appropriated these lands, and they lost a lot of their lands. So when their lands became state lands, a treaty was negotiated with them by our governor, Governor Isaac Stevens, right? And they wanted to make sure that not only were the places that they could hunt, fish, collect, and all that were respected, but also their right to seal. I love seals. To seal and whale, right? And they were a few tribes or a few groups that actually put that into their treaty. So it's unusual, and they stand out because they have that written into their treaty. By law, that's what we guarantee them, right? No matter how hurtful that might seem to environmentalists and rights activists or whatnot, right? Now, in their negotiation with the federal government, they said, we want you to support us and support our lifestyles. We want you to support our fishing and our hunting of whales, right? Federal government said, we will, right? and said, we'll send provisions to help support you, right? And the like. And instead of sending them provisions to help with their fishing and whaling, they were sent things to use in agriculture, something that they weren't accustomed to in their culture. Call it assimilation, call it acculturation, call it inculturation. No, acculturation with an A. That means we're aggressively taking over your culture and suggesting you that you behave otherwise, right? This is on the level of the boarding schools and the things like that we did with Native Americans, right? Same thing with the Macaw. We sent them tools for farming and suggested, nah, you should drop this uncivilized practice. Okay. We'll talk more later about the theory of civilized people and uncivilized people. That'll be an interesting conversation. Okay. So we negotiated releasing Indian slaves, talked about penalties for alcohol use. Are you aware that to this very day, the indigenous people of the Mayagna indigenous people of Nicaragua live in an area that is illegal to consume alcohol in? Does that surprise anybody? Okay, surprised me. It's like prohibition. You know, we did this to the Native Americans here. Still to this day, the Nicaraguan government does this with the Mayagna indigenous people and other indigenous people in their country. So kind of an interesting parallel, right? So in the end, we had a problem because the gray whale was what the Macaw were hunting. Anybody know a little bit about the Endangered Species Act? Raise your hands if you know about that, right? Okay, so if we declare a species endangered, that means we can't hunt it, right? Right now, the state of Hawaii is talking about what it means to take the turtle off the endangered species list. Imagine going to Hawaii, laying out on the beach, seeing somebody bring in a hunted turtle. Oh, do you know they cry? I've actually seen this in Nicaragua. They cry, and then, it's awful, right? But there are so many turtles in native Hawaii right now that it's causing a problem with sharks. Interesting, right? Okay, so for the macaw, we had the gray whale listed on the Endangered Species Act, and that meant they no longer could hunt it. So they went for 70 years without hunting that whale. 70 years. And then finally, we delisted it. We said, it's fine. Told the macaw they could harvest upwards of around 300 different whales of the gray whale a year. They said, we just want, we want to do our first hunt, right? Not really interested in wiping them out or even up to 300. We just want to hunt the whale. And some people said, oh, this is silly. What's the point now? You've gone 70 years. You don't need to return to hunting whale, right? And the macaw people said, you know, this is who we are. Whale hunting determines our families. Like the captain of the boat is a big leader, right? Related to others in the boat. And that's how our social structure works. Not to mention all of our stories, all of our song. Our children and grandchildren don't know the taste of whale. Imagine trying to tell that to Native Hawaiians. Your children and grandchildren are never going to know the taste of poi. Ever. Good for you? Right? I mean, you could say this about any traditional indigenous group about their traditional foods. Be horrified by that idea. Same thing with the macaw. So they argued and argued and argued, and because they were delisted, got rights to whale. Right? And in 1997, they had their first hunt. And it was amazing. Right? You know the whale wars on TV, ever heard of that show? Yeah. Sea Shepherd and the like, they were there. Sea Shepherd was there buzzing around, right? Following every move the macaw whaling group were making. Of course, because they were there, the Coast Guard was there, following their every move, right? Making sure that there was peace and everything was legal, right? because of the endangered species issue, we had NOAA with their boats there tracking what was going on with the whales, right? And then, of course, we had all the news helicopters flying around above. Lucky that they were able to land a whale, but they did. They landed a whale, and it was huge news. We had indigenous people flying from all around the world to attend the landing of a whale. Fascinating. What was at stake? Indigenous people triumphed over animal rights activists, environmentalists, federal governments, sovereignty issues, treaty issues, you name it. Sea Shepherd, right? Greenpeace, throw them in there too, right? They prevailed in being able to exercise their culture. Now, some of us find whaling repulsive. Some of us find their exercising of their traditional rights wonderful, right? So we have different feelings about this. We'll keep talking about this through the semester. But in terms of cultural clash, this is exactly what we're talking about. What a mess that was on the day in Nia Bay. There we are rhyming again. In Nia Bay on the Olympic Peninsula when they went out for their first hunt. And they have hunted since, right? What sovereignty they held, right? We'll talk about sovereignty later, okay? Now, federal government did something silly in that they put an added law on this gray whale. Uh-oh, hold on. It's gonna do it again, I know it. How do I get out of this? Oh, there we go. Coffee cup, okay. So, NOAA issued what they called a Marine Mammal Protective Order for the gray whale. This is not a part of any other laws within the requirements of the Endangered Species Act. It was something that was added on top, and it prevents the macaw from directly being able to go out and whale. Said, when you go out and whale, you have to come into the NOAA offices and get a petition, a waiver, that says you're going to go hunt this whale. Register with NOAA. What is NOAA? Does anybody know what NOAA is? National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, part of the federal government, right? Do stuff all over the world, okay? So, for the first time, we have an additional law that's layered on top of treaty rights. We got a problem, right? Like huge cultural clash, maybe even bigger along with politics. And we had some people that left the tribe areas in early morning, went out on their own, right? Had their nice rifle with them and hunted that whale without getting one of those waivers. Went against the law. And in their eyes, they were standing up for their sovereignty and autonomy and their treaty rights, right? But they got caught, arrested, put in jail, and then the Elders Council had to respond. And what they said was fascinating. They said, we are a tribe of law-abiding citizens. To that regard, it's like we took some steps forward in sovereignty and exercising our treaty rights for whaling, but then when the government threw a wrench at us, we took a couple steps back and said, oh, we're not ready to assert that level of sovereignty yet, right? Different from like the Lakota that have said, you know what? Screw the treaty rights. We don't want them. Gave them up. Officially said, we do not want treaties with the U.S. government. Why do you think that is? How come? Exactly. If we're sovereign, we don't need treaties, right? We can make agreements, but we're not going to fall under the authority of the U.S. government, right? Kind of interesting how these things work. Okay. All right. Other forms of culture clash. We talked about slavery on Tuesday. Also, there's some links that you can check on modern day slavery, which is surprising, right? Some of us don't realize that we have this going on. Okay. All right. Couple other concepts in your text, in your reading: adaptive and maladaptive culture. So we had this idea that some cultures and their traits were adaptive and others were maladaptive, right? So if we were going to say something was maladaptive for genetics or the genetics of a population, we'd say maybe celibacy might be maladaptive because your genetics won't pass on to the next generation. Okay, so that would be maladaptive, right? Against your nature of trying to pass on your genes, right? But in our work as anthropologists, we have come to make comments about other cultures and called things maladaptive or adaptive. Sometimes not using very much of a holistic study at it. And have been criticized about it, right? In fact, our history is horrid. The beginnings of our discipline is disgusting. We'll read about that in coming weeks, okay? So you'll get the chance to see just how bad it was when we started trying to make sense of the other, right? We did a real bad job. Interestingly enough, a lot of it developed during the colonial era, right? 1600s, 1700s, right? So you can think about that, 1800s, and how it might have influenced our descriptions, okay? So we talk about a couple of concepts here, and one of them is called ethnocentrism. Does anybody know what that is? Anybody explain what it is? Yes.
Our society is the best.
Our society is the best. Yay! Go us, right? Yes, perfect. So we're judging everything else from our point of view, right? Everything else is weird if it doesn't conform to our culture, right? Or there's abnormalities, okay? So we say that a lot of this is an example of what we call racism today, right? Ethnocentrism will equate with racism oftentimes. And then we've had a lot of anthropologists try and figure out how do we deal with this problem of ethnocentrism. And we've introduced a concept, a theory called cultural relativism. How many people have heard that? Okay. Cultural relativism. And that's where our idea is trying to understand another culture on their terms. Some say that's impossible. Others say we need to try. Okay. So Franz Boas, Bronislaw Malinowski were prominent in talking about ethnocentrism. They said, you know what we really need to do as anthropologists? Get in the field. Go to the field. Can't sit here in our ivory tower and just look through books and learn about things. We got to go out there, right? How many people have traveled? Do we talk about on Tuesday? How many people have done some traveling? Raise your hands. All right, got to get out there and see what it's like, right? Can't just get stuck on the rock, as we would say in Kauai, right? So getting out there and living with the communities that you're working with and being there for a long time. Now, how much is a long time? How much is enough to be able to say something about another culture? What do you think? First of all, maybe you should say that you don't know the local language. Now, how much time do you think it would take? 3 years, maybe. Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. Probably about 3 years, right? I did my dissertation work for about 5 years. It was a long time, okay? I've worked with the Mayagna people for about 25 years. And to this very day, I still have no understanding of what they would call their cosmovision or their religion or spirituality. Still not really understanding that aspect about that culture group. Can't master it. Some of it's not shareable. Some of it is difficult for me to understand. So there are aspects of culture that I will never understand no matter how long I live with them. It's just part of it, right? So some of us, when we're talking about culture, we say they're like lenses, right? We look through our cultural lenses at the world, and yeah, we do make interpretations of what we see. And sometimes we're aware that we have these lenses on, but sometimes when we're wearing them, we just forget. And it's dark and colored a special way, and we don't see everything. Thinking we do, we might not always. Yeah. So when we talk about ethnocentrism, it's attempting to take those cultural lenses off and be more aware of the relative aspects of a specific culture, right? So one of our topics that we talk about when we talk about cultural relativism, and it's probably one of our most difficult topics, and topics that is really difficult for the world to grapple with, and that is female circumcision. How many people don't know about this? Raise your hands. Don't know. Raise them high. So like, no, maybe a fourth of the class, right? Or a third, okay? What we're talking about is something that the World Health Organization says is a violation of the rights of young girls. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, right? World Health Organization says under the UN that these girls are too young to know what they want. And it hurts them health-wise, or it can, right? If it's not done properly. Okay. And we have some cultures that say, we want this. What do you do with that? UN, World Health Organization, says, bad, against the violating the rights of women, right? And yet if we have some culture groups out there saying, this is important to us, some might question, well, who's saying that? Who's talking? How old are they? Do they really represent the voices of the girls? Right? Are they male, female? Okay, so there's some questions that would be involved. But some anthropologists have spent some time with groups that do female circumcision in attempts to understand why it's practiced, if it's wanted, right? And what that might be about. Okay, so when we talk about cultural relativism, that's one of our biggest topics in anthropology. You'll hear it again and again and again. Okay, so, and you'll read it in your textbook. Okay, now, taking these concepts a little bit further, it's going to be a little bit of a problem. I'm sorry. I don't mean to like lay out all these theories for you and show you they're all nice and pretty and on this nice little pendulum or line of ethnocentrism versus cultural relativism. But let's try this on for size. Going into talking about human rights, such as those girls or anybody else for that matter, one of the things that we learn in law school is that, human rights, they're not culturally relative. Think about it. Think about it for a little bit. Not all cultures and the way cultures are have acceptable behaviors to all, and vice versa, right? So we have a problem with international human rights law in that various aspects of culture might be respected or violated, okay? Such as female circumcision amongst those groups that say they want it and the UN says no, right? That'd be an example, okay? No, our human rights system, universal human rights system, yeah, we call it universal, but it is really of a specific perspective, okay? Interesting to try on that hat for size, right? The idea that the entire UN has a specific perspective, right? Go look and learn about the UN. It'll blow your mind, really. Figure out how it works. Okay. All right. Two more groups that I have links here for you. One is called Cultural Survival, Advancing Indigenous Peoples' Rights and Cultures Worldwide. They're awesome. They have a thing on Facebook. They're all over the place, Twitter, whatnot. They have campaigns and they support Indigenous people's rights, right? So, great, excellent group. They do a lot with land. Back during the Sandinista-Contra War, they were on the ground in Nicaragua, right? So, fascinating stories about them. Survival International is another group that does a lot for human rights around the world. Amazon to the Kalahari, as they say. I know one of their campaigns with a group that's called the Panan. See if they're here. That looks like the Panan, but it might not be. Let's see. Why don't we try and find it? Let's find the Panan. I have a page. Look at that. Okay, so anybody been hearing the news lately about palm forests and the palm oils? Yeah? Okay, that's the Penang, all right? So they're in Sarawak, Malaysia, and they're nomadic, and a lot of them have been forced to be sedentarized. Remember what those terms were, right? So forced to not be nomadic anymore. And they have very little to no money, and a lot of these are being used for palm oil. The rest of the logs are being used for, get this, chopsticks. Think about how many chopsticks you toss out, right? Go through in the years. I don't know how many people eat with chopsticks. I know I eat with chopsticks a lot. Okay, so you can read about the Penang on that site. So if you're interested in topics for your research essay, you could find topics very, very easily on those two sites. Lastly, I'm going to talk about something that your text talks about, and that is intellectual property rights. How many people have heard this term before? Okay, kind of like copyright with a book or a song or something like that, but a little bit further, intellectual property rights, we're starting to discuss in terms of knowledge, right? Think about medicine. Remember, we talked on Tuesday and we said, you know, at one point, about 90% of all of our medicines came from the Amazon, right? Get this figure. We say we only know 2% of what exists in the Amazon in terms of species. 2%. What do you think about that? Mind-blowing, right? Now, let me ask you this. Who are those 2%? Are those all the indigenous people that live down there? There's upwards of 300 different languages down in the Amazon. Amazing, right? Similar numbers in Guatemala and other places, right? So if you think about who has the knowledge, that 2% actually is much bigger, right? And we have a tremendous amount of knowledge that gets passed on. One example is quinine. Okay, how many people have taken pills for malaria? Raise your hands. Nobody? Oh my gosh, I had to take them and they're awful. They make you want to throw up. They're terrible, but you don't get malaria. Yay, right? Ugh, they're awful, right? So if you get told that you're going and traveling in parts where there's malaria and you have to take malaria pills, get ready, because it's like, I don't do it anymore. I just cover myself with DEET, right? You know, the 100% or 99% DEET that they sell at REI that keeps bugs off, right? Oof, that's bad for you too, right? I don't want malaria though, or to be sick, right? But we found out from the Quechua people down in South America that quinine is something that comes from what we call the holy bark tree. And we found that this bark can make something that keeps malaria away. Yay! Right? Travelers visited, contact happened, knowledge was exchanged, and pretty soon we had a mass production of quinine all over the world. Think about Schweppes tonic water. Have you ever heard of this? Or tonic water in general? Yeah? Guess what the tonic is? Quinine. Tonic water comes from wanting to use a water for travel that's going to help protect you from malaria. How about that, right? Multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar industry, right? Think of all the dollars that are going into the medicines. That came from an indigenous group. Did they get the royalties? No. Did they get paid back for their knowledge? No. Do they get a dime from their knowledge? No. So a lot of us working with indigenous groups are concerned about the intellectual property rights of the people that we work with, right? Including when we do work with them on their knowledge, like environmental knowledge, management of land, birds, by example, we often are wanting to give that data back so that it's theirs, right? Not ours. In fact, there's even an indigenous group in Panama called the Cuna, And they have a special way of interacting with scientists that just blows my mind. You have to come in and hire local indigenous people for your research assistants, right? You have to tell them what you're going to do first and get their approval. And then once you get going and you start to write things up, they have first rights to edit all of your work. Wow. Imagine that. How many authors would give that right away? But they said, no, you're not coming on our property into our territory to work with us unless you agree to these legal understandings. Protecting themselves. Brilliant. Because look at what happens, right? Amazing. Okay. All right. Let's see. Anything else that we have to talk about today? Yes.
Would they have wanted any of the prophets?
Would they have wanted any of the prophets? I think there's been some discussion today, even, or in the last maybe 20 years, about how they feel that they're due. Yeah. There are some groups. I worked with some groups in El Salvador that were talking about developing their own kind of manual of knowledge and making sure it was copyrighted and that they had some kind of a cooperative where they were receiving the royalties for it and all the like. Yeah. So that'd be an example of one example. Yeah.
Wasn't last class you talking about how some group published a book about all of their
Yes.
findings?
500-page publication. Let's see if we can find that.
So then did they get paid for that for sharing their knowledge? Or?
Yeah. In fact, they own it. Uh-huh. I don't see it here. How could they do this to me? All right, well, I'll find that for you guys. I'm not going to spend our time wasting it, just taking a look at that. Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, that's all I have for you today. Have a good day. Are we early? Yeah, we are. Okay.